I guess most of you have seen The Andy Griffith Show, and while Mayberry may have been a fictional town, it was based on a very real place. At the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains in Surry County sits Mount Airy, North Carolina, the childhood home of Andy Griffith. Today, if you visit, you'll see the remnants of the sitcom, and there's a replica of the jail and courthouse where Andy governed the town, and you can take a tour in Barney Fife's squad car. You might get a haircut at Floyd's barbershop and finish your day up at the Snappy lunch counter. And there's even a yearly Mayberry Days festival each fall, and it's like stepping back in time. If you go, you may want to stop and hike at Pilot Mountain, or Mount Pilot as Andy used to call it. And just thinking about all that gives you just a little touch of nostalgia. And today's episode begins in Mount Airy, crosses the state to the coast, and ends up in Chatham County, North Carolina, and it's an explosive tale.
I'm Darlene.
And I'm Melody.
This is Hard Times and True Crimes.
So one of the things, Darlene, that we have not been doing recently is our coffee talk and our coffee drinking.
Yep.
So
we're meeting too late to have coffee. Like, I can't do caffeine anymore after 2.
And neither can I. And we record right now in the evenings. And most of our local coffee shops are closed by that time anyway. So we're just trying to think of what else we could get together and drink in the evenings.
Yeah, something comforting, like coffee, but not coffee.
I mean, I guess there's tea or hot chocolate, but well, actually, hot chocolate keeps me awake too.
Does it?
It does. The caffeine in it. Yeah, there's caffeine in chocolate, and it does keep me awake. Plus, I'm not really eating a lot of sugar. But so if you all have any ideas of stuff we can do for our coffee talk, let us know. Other than that, it's just going to be a bottle of water.
Yep. We're still drinking coffee just during the day.
Yes. You've had an interesting week?
Oh my gosh. I've been so dang sick with the flu.
Yeah, you sounded rough when I talked to you.
So sick. I got sick I could tell that I was getting sick last Friday. And you just got that feeling, like a little bit of a sore throat and sneezing, and you could just feel it coming. And then Saturday night, I was like, oh wow, I really am getting sick. And then Sunday, bam.
And then Curtis got it too.
And then Curtis got it. And I was sick for a whole week. Like, even up until yesterday, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm still sick.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm
the
glad
flu
you're
is
feeling
rough
better.
this year.
I've heard that it is really everywhere.
And I had flu A. I don't know. Google says that flu A is worse. So I don't know if it actually is or not, but
okay. Just depends on if you trust Google.
Yes.
And since Curtis was sick, that's why you got your intro from me this week, but he's going to be back. So don't leave us.
Yes. And if you enjoyed the music from last week's episode, my daughter Memphis, she is living in Colorado, but she came in to visit, bless her heart, for the week that I was sick.
Oh, poor
Memphis. But she did help us out, and she did that intro for us. So she sang beautifully.
It was absolutely beautiful and haunting.
Yes.
I'm telling you, your whole family is so stinking talented.
Thank you.
I have to admit, I'm a little envious of that. But yeah, it was beautiful. Okay, well, did you watch much Andy Griffith growing up?
Of course, yes.
Yeah. Do you remember the episode where there's a goat, they're doing some construction, and this goat eats some dynamite, and like the whole town, they're all worried that that goat is going to blow up. So Andy and Barney, they finally managed to get him out of town. But before that, like, the goat goes in Otis's cell, and then Otis comes in drunk, and he doesn't realize it. And so he's like rough handling him.
Oh, Lord.
And then they realize, oh no, he's going to cause that thing to explode. So they get the goat out of town, and of course everything's okay. So do you remember that episode?
I don't remember that. I've probably seen it, but it doesn't ring a bell.
Okay. Well, Mayberry, or Mount Airy, the town that it is based on, they actually really did have a bomb situation once. This one was far more serious, and that's the story I'm going to tell you today.
Okay.
It does not involve goats or the harming of any goats.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. So on December 31st, 1951, it was New Year's Eve morning, and 24-year-old William Cochran a graduate of NC State, climbed into his pickup truck to leave for work. Cochran was an agriculture teacher, it's a mouthful, at White Plains School, which was a little community just outside of Mount Airy city limits, about 4 miles outside. The Christmas break had come to an end, and it was time to get back into the swing of things, much like we all are now. And he was going back to school. William lived with his new wife, Imogene, at the Franklin Apartments in Mount Airy. They had been married just 4 months.
Did you already tell me what year this was?
1951. They were still very much newlyweds. Imogene worked as a home demonstration agent for the Surrey County Home Extension Office. And she had left that morning for work just before William. So when he left, he headed out. And when he got in to start his truck, when he turned over the ignition, the truck blew up.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. The explosion rocked the neighborhood for several blocks, actually. There was shattered glass from the windows where they were just blown out of the apartment building. It scattered parts of the truck all around, like big pieces of metal. And sadly, it blasted William through the roof of the truck, and he landed several feet away. Badly injured in the blast, one of his legs had been completely torn from his body, and the other was mangled. An ambulance worker walked over him, he just went ahead and pulled the sheet over his face.
Wow.
But the still breathing Cochran pulled it away, saying, "I'm not dead yet." Probably they would have assumed there's no way he could have survived that blast.
Right.
But he had. At the hospital, the doctors jumped into quick action, desperately trying to save William. Doctors amputated his remaining injured leg and gave blood transfusions. Law enforcement also jumped into action, posting a deputy outside of his door for protection. Not knowing who could have done this, they didn't want to risk that the bomber may come back and try to finish the job. William was such a well-loved teacher that some of his students even offered to donate blood in an attempt to save his life.
Wow.
Hospital personnel did say, well, we have enough for now, but if we need it, we'll let you know. And I just thought that really speaks volumes of how much they loved him. Sadly, the loss of blood and other injuries were too great, and William Cochran passed away from those injuries 13 hours after his truck had exploded. Minutes before he died, William managed to whisper and ask, "Who could have done this?" And his guess was as good as anyone's. Cochran's parents had traveled 4 hours from Franklin, North Carolina, to make arrangements for his burial. How do you say that word?
Burial?
For his burial. They held the visitation for him at Moody's Funeral Home in Mount Airy, and newspapers estimated that more than 3,000 people passed through there.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a lot. I mean, it sounds almost like the whole town.
Yeah.
But you think 1951.
Oh, yeah.
And the school was closed that day so that the students could attend. And then William's body was taken back to his hometown of Franklin, where his father was the chief of police. And they held a funeral for him there at Patton Methodist Church, and over 600 people attended that. And then he was buried in the family plot there. And so now the police turned to their job of trying to figure out, well, who had done this horrible thing and why? Like, what was a motive here? The day after the bombing, Mount Airy Police Chief Monty Boone took the fragments of the bomb to Washington, D.C. to acquire the FBI's help. And some of those fragments actually had to be taken from Cochran's body. They couldn't find a lot of it because it was so scattered, so they got what they could, and even, to get as much as they could, whatever pieces came from him, they used. And it took a few days for the lab results to come back through the mail, but still, it was pretty quick considering, they didn't have an option to fax or email results back then.
Yeah.
And so by that Friday, he took them on Tuesday, and by that Friday, they had already gotten those results back.
Okay.
So that's pretty quick work.
Very quick I would say for 1951.
Yeah.
Especially.
So the chief, he actually studied those results for an hour before he even released them to the media. And he reluctantly announced that the lab had been unable to determine what the bomb was constructed of or how it had gone off. The findings did, however, suggest that it came from a high-order type explosive, quote unquote.
Okay.
So these findings, initially were not very helpful. However, authorities knew that the most common high explosive components were usually dynamite and nitroglycerin.
Mm.
And being that was the only thing they had to go on thus far, it made them wonder if the person who constructed the bomb may have been a veteran, someone trained in explosives. Because you have to think, this 1951, World War II had only been over for 7 years.
Right.
I mean, yeah. And so in addition to being a teacher at the school, William also ran a program that trained veterans in an agriculture center nearby.
Interesting.
And some of those veterans were, of course, from World War II.
Yeah.
And they would have knowledge of explosive devices. Their theory was that maybe there was some jealousy because you have a non-veteran supervising a program over these veterans in a training program, and maybe someone was a little jealous.
But my gosh, I mean, blow them up over it.
Exactly. But they're just trying to find something, anything. And so their first thing is, well, maybe there's some jealousy or some resentment.
Right.
So at this point, the State Bureau of Investigation is also helping. So SBI officers spent a whole day questioning those veterans in his program, but nothing came from that and no suspects emerged at all. So then investigators began to dig into William and Imogene's past. The slender, blue-eyed brunette Imogene had attended Appalachian State Teachers College. They looked into anyone that she may have dated before, or when she was a teacher in Chatham County prior to coming to Mount Airy. And they thought, well, maybe there was a spurned ex-boyfriend.
And didn't you say they had only been married for a few months, right?
Yes, 4 months.
4 months, okay.
But actually, she had no serious boyfriends before William. Like, there just wasn't anything really to go on there either.
Okay.
Imogene told authorities that she had no idea. She couldn't think of who it would be. She said he doesn't have any enemies. And a neighbor reiterated that, saying, well, they were just the loveliest couple you could imagine. They're nice, quiet neighbors, just a typical American boy and girl.
Wow.
And so they couldn't think of anything either.
Yeah.
Some even considered, well, maybe it was just a New Year's prank gone wrong. That maybe it wasn't meant to be that explosive, and maybe some teenagers were just trying to play a joke, and it
on their teacher.
Yeah,
I can see that. Yeah,
and it was New Year's Eve. But the police chief, he quickly put that theory to rest. They were fairly certain that truck had been booby trapped with explosives that had been made by an expert. They just didn't think any teenagers would know how to do anything like that.
Okay.
They said to the papers that they felt this was a planned, deliberate murder. Then there were theories that, well, he is the son of a police chief. Perhaps he's the target of somebody who has a vendetta toward the chief himself.
Yeah.
But they couldn't really get anywhere with that either. I mean, nothing was really apparent.
Okay.
And William's father, William Cochran Sr., came out to Mount Airy to help with the investigation because, again, he was a police chief himself. He didn't say that there was anything to that he could find either.
Okay.
The community of students, parents, and school faculty met on that Thursday of that week at the school where Mr. Cochran had taught. And they discussed the situation. And this was even before the results from the FBI came back. And they were planning, to help with a reward. I mean, this community rallied. And these grieving students, they had like a study hall in lieu of their agriculture class. They reminisced about taking FFA field trips with their teacher in that truck that had been destroyed.
Wow.
What they would do, 2 students would sit up front with Mr. Cochran, and the rest would just pile in the back of that truck, and then they would drive out to their field trips. And
that was a simpler time, wasn't it?
Definitely a simpler time. I mean, I remember the days of riding in the back of a pickup truck, and that was no big deal.
No,
but
it was so fun.
It was. But, kids today really, that's just not a common occurrence you're going to see. And when they do it, they're like really doing something against the law,
Right.
So it's interesting to think that you were riding in the back of your teacher's pickup truck.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. But even to them, it seemed hard to believe that anybody would do anything so horrible to this man who is so respected in his community.
Mm-hmm.
So the city of Mount Airy, they offered a $2,500 reward for information leading to the arrest of the person or persons responsible for that bomb. $2,100 of that was from the citizens themselves that they gathered. And then the remaining $400 was tacked on by then North Carolina Governor Carr Scott.
Okay.
And that actually is about equal to $30,000 today.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
For that time.
Nothing ever came from it. Even from the reward offer, no leads came in, or the ones that did just were not even anything helpful.
Yeah. Okay.
In the first few weeks after his death, authorities hinted at expecting to make an arrest soon. And they said they had a suspect in mind, but not enough evidence to make an arrest.
Okay.
So people were hopeful. But for 2 years, nothing happened. But this case, they didn't close the case. It was far from closed, but just, it seemed to kind of just fade away.
All right.
About a year after that awful event, Imogene attempted to make a fresh start by moving from the foothills across the state to Edenton, North Carolina, which was near the coast.
Okay.
And so she took a teaching job. And then just 2 years after her husband had been slain, she did meet someone new. And by April of 1954, she was making wedding plans again.
Okay.
This time she was engaged to George Byram, and he was one of Edenton's city council members and one of its most eligible bachelors.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were to be married in the next month. They were going to get married in May of 1954.
Okay.
On the morning of April 7, 1954, Imogene walked to her car, which was parked outside a rooming house where she was living.
Mm-hmm.
And as she was getting in, she noticed something poking out from underneath the driver's seat. And it was an open top box about 6 by 10 inches. And there were like some tiny pebbles and stuff in there. And then some copper wire and a flashlight battery.
My gracious.
And
this is another town.
Yeah, clear across the state.
Okay.
And she quickly called for help. Her landlord came and he actually carried the box to a vacant field, which was kind of brave.
Very brave.
And they called the police. This time, it was Edenton Police Chief George Dale who identified that the wire, flashlight battery, and blasting powder was the makings of a bomb.
Mm.
And so he carried it to the police station carefully, but unfortunately, it blew up when he was carrying it.
Oh, no.
And he was badly injured with burns to his arms and legs because it detonated while he was in transit.
Yeah.
Now, he didn't die and he didn't lose any appendages or anything.
Okay.
But, I mean, he was burned.
Still, I bet it hurt.
I'm sure. So now the SBI is called again, and they sent 5 agents to Edenton immediately.
Yeah.
2 of those agents had worked the William Cochran bombing case 2 years before, and they noted there was a pretty big difference in the first bomb, which seemed like it was made by an expert, and this bomb, which was kind of a crude bomb, didn't look like it was that could look like it could have been a teenager's prank. It just wasn't as well made.
Okay.
So they thought, and they wondered, well, maybe it's only meant to scare her and not kill her. And again, it did go off in that police officer's hands and definitely wasn't strong enough to blow up a truck.
Yes.
And the fact that it was left in sight where she could actually see it when she got in the car, they started, questioning that.
I wonder if it's her.
Well, I'm sure they wondered that too.
Okay. Oh, goodness.
It's
always the spouse.
That's always where your mind goes, though, isn't it? Like,
yes.
it's always going to be that significant other.
Mm-hmm.
Well, keep listening. This time, investigators honed in on one particular suspect. Someone they actually had questioned in their first bombing attempt. Someone by the name of George Henry Smith.
Okay.
George was a trucker and a salesman of Cedar Post, and he had grown up living close to Imogene in her hometown of Pittsboro, North Carolina. Their houses were just across and down a dirt road from one another, so maybe like a diagonal type thing.
Right.
And their parents knew one another.
Okay.
So they were neighbors. They had kind of grown up together. He was a bit older than her, but nonetheless, I mean, they knew each other fairly well.
Sure.
Police were suspicious that George seemed to be a little fixated on Imogene. And she had rebuffed his efforts at a relationship in the past. One paper said that he had repeatedly asked her out and she had repeatedly turned him down.
Okay.
So now Chatham County Sheriff Jay Emerson, he had known George Smith for over 30 years, since he was a little kid. And he described George as peculiar, a very quiet fellow who didn't like crowds. And he said even when George's parents would have visitors to the house, that George would leave and go out and sit in the woods for 2 to 3 hours until they all left.
Oh, so he really didn't like a crowd.
So I'm kind of, when you think of the antisocial type, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he had an older brother that owned a filling station in town, and he would hang around there. Sometimes he worked for him, but people said he never had a word to say to him.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, he did not have a criminal record to speak of other than 2 minor infractions, and those were about 10 years old. About 10 years before, he had a liquor violation in Forsyth County and a license revocation in Alamance County. But he really came from a fine, good family.
Yeah.
I had told you about the one brother that owned the filling station, and his other brother was a lawyer in town.
Okay.
Now, what I didn't tell you before, and what they had not told the townspeople of Mount Airy before, is that the FBI had suspected him all along, but with no evidence, they weren't able to move on that conviction. But they had been watching him.
Okay.
So the people of the town didn't know, but he was being watched.
Well, did they tell her about this, Imogene?
I don't know. I didn't see anything that said they had told her.
I always think it's unfair when they don't.
Yeah, because her life really was at
On the
risk.
line. Yeah.
Yeah. During the 2 years, those SBI agents had continually looked into him and had come to Pittsburgh in search of further clues. Now, Sheriff Emerson, he had been informed too. He was the sheriff of Chatham County, where George lives. He had been informed by the SBI that they had questioned him in that bombing before, so he knew. And he had actually kept him on his radar too. Okay. And so sometimes he would drive by Smith's house and kind of just look for anything out of the ordinary and kind of just keeping his eyes open.
Yeah.
So it was on his radar. Imogene's mother told reporters that she considered George a quiet, church-going man and that the facts had been distorted.
Oh, okay.
But the weekend before Imogene had found that bomb in her car in Edenton, she had returned home to Pittsburgh for a visit with her parents. And police were wondering, did she run into Smith while she was there? Did she say, "Hey, I'm engaged"? Or maybe he already knew because the parents spoke.
Sure.
And they thought maybe that set him off. And they thought, well, maybe he put that bomb in her car even while she was there. They weren't sure.
Okay.
They didn't feel it was very likely that he had, because that drive to Edenton was over 3 hours, and it probably would have jostled it enough to possibly explode. But they were speculating a lot of things, and they thought maybe that weekend was the catalyst for the second bomb. Agents went to George's place of employment, that gas station of his brother's, and they questioned him at length. And during that questioning, he was noticeably nervous. During that visit, they actually they asked him, could they vacuum his car? And he allowed them to.
Okay.
Unbeknownst to George, after they questioned him, they also waited for him to finish his shift, and they followed him when he got off work just to see where he would go. He drove straight home to his parents' home on Goldston Road, and he was a bachelor and still lived at home with his parents. And by the time they arrived at the house, I guess they were following from a distance, he had already pulled his truck up into the yard and was out of the truck. So when they knocked on the door, the parents were like, "No, we haven't seen him." So he was nowhere around. He lived in front of some woods, and so they all started searching the woods for him. And they called his name. They didn't get any response. So after quite a while of looking for him, there was a storm coming up and it was getting dark. So they said, we're going to have to call this search off until morning.
Right.
And that's what they did. So the next morning, they resumed that search immediately. But in the end, George was not found by authorities. He was found by his brother, David, and his 14-year-old nephew. He was slumped against a tree, and he had shot himself in the chest with his .22.
Wow, that's terrible.
Yeah.
I mean,
they surmised he probably had actually done this just after they had lost sight of him the day before. The family did not want his body to be brought back to the house, so responders had to carry him a mile through the woods, heavy, thick woods, which was not easy because he was about 175 pounds.
yeah.
But they got him out there to the ambulance and removed him. And later, after the body was found, the results of the vacuuming from his car came back. The grainy material that they found was similar to the vacuumed remnants from Imogene's bomb box.
Oh, okay.
It seemed to match. And there was a map in his car folded in a way that the route to Edenton from the west part of the state was on top. So they figured, well, he had driven out to Edenton.
Right.
They also found in his shirt pocket a bit of copper wire, similar to what the bomb had been constructed with. So still in his pocket, or maybe he carried some around. I don't know.
Right.
And in addition to that, it was reported that George had been in Mount Airy on the day of Cochrane's death. That evidence, coupled with his suicide, convinced them that he was the one who had planted both bombs. Detectives declared the case solved, and they were satisfied that George Smith was the perpetrator in both instances. At first, William Cochrane's father was not satisfied that that case was closed. He had only gotten information that he had read in newspaper reports. I guess he, in 2 years, had probably lost, wasn't keeping quite up with the contact with them. But he drove out to meet with the SBI, and after they showed him their findings, he was convinced that, yes, that was the culprit as well.
Okay.
The Greensboro News and Record summed it up best with this account. They said, quote, "The story of unrequited love, murder, attempted murder, and suicide was brought to an end with George Smith's funeral at Pleasant Hill Methodist Church in Pittsburgh."
Gosh. You just feel so bad for the families on every side.
Yes.
Because, his family did nothing to deserve anything like that. But certainly the families that, just because he didn't get what he wanted.
Yeah. And there
What
are
a selfish person.
really, and there are 3 families,
Yes.
her family and William Cochrane's family. And then again, like you said, his family. Nobody wants to think of their child of being capable of something like that. And
right. We love our kids.
Exactly. So just very tragic for all 3 families. And, just cutting short the newlywed life of that young couple, 24 years old.
So sad. Now, did Imogene's family end up believing that he was
Yeah.
Okay.
They were convinced when all of that evidence came forward.
Okay.
But, it was just somebody he apparently had been fixated on her for some time. And I guess she did not realize the extent of that. I'm sure she knew, oh, he's liked me. But that's never going to happen. And
right.
she probably didn't think that he had it in him to kill her husband and then attempt either, an attempt on her own life.
Sure.
So...
That's terrible. Wow. Those sure were some hard times.
They were.
Hey guys, I just wanted to let you know that if you go on Apple Podcast and leave a rating, a 5-star rating and a review, that we will send you a nice sticker.
Yeah, decal with our logo.
Yes. So just send us a screenshot that you've done that, your address, and we will get you one of those mailed out. And you can also leave a rating on Spotify.
Just send the screenshot to hardtimesandtruecrimes@gmail.com.
Yes. And we appreciate y'all so much. Thank y'all for listening.
Now, I've heard people say that the Andy Griffith Show was filmed in Mount Airy, but that's just not true. It was filmed in a studio in sunny California. But I'll tell you what is true. It's been colder than a witch's tit in a brass bra this week. It's the perfect weather to find somebody to snuggle up with and listen to every episode of Hard Times and True Crimes. And while you're at it, you might as well like, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. I'm fixing to grab the hold of Darlene and snuggle with her. So you make sure you tell everybody you know, even if you don't want to snuggle with them, to check us out. Till next time, goodbye.